Welcome to this explainer. The 1962 Sino-Indian War is a fascinating, albeit really sobering piece of history. But today, we're not just looking at it as some distant historical event. We're actually using it as a forensic case study. Because here's the thing, military defeat isn't always forged on the front lines. Very often, a crushing defeat is engineered months or even years in advance, right in the highest echelons of government.
And that prompts us to ask a very specific question right out of the gate. Where is a war really won or lost? As we zoom out from the physical battlefield, the mud, the freezing mountains, the trenches, we really need to look at the quiet, bureaucratic decision rooms, the places where politicians and civil servants make fateful decisions. So we're going to take a stark, honest look into the political and systemic factors that directly engineered India's defeat in 1962.
Okay, let's dive right into this autopsy. We've got 5 key parts to cover today: the strategic blueprint, ignored warnings, the assumption trap, broken systems, and finally, the preparedness deficit.
Starting with Part 1, the strategic blueprint. This is the absolute foundation of national security. To really understand why things fell apart so catastrophically, we first have to establish the ideal baseline. Think of it like a national security pyramid. The higher direction of war requires a perfect welding of 4 distinct layers. It starts right at the top with a clear political aim, which then dictates the strategy, which is then backed up by actual military capability, and finally, it's all supported by logistics. You see, politics, the economy, and defense, they've got to form this tight composite whole. But the absolute tragedy of 1962 is that this entire structure collapsed. The politician, the civil servant, and the soldier had absolutely no smooth working arrangement. In fact, there was a deep-seated distrust among them.
Let's see how this builds into Part 2, ignored warnings. The writing was quite literally on the wall.
This war didn't just drop out of a clear blue sky. In 1950, the Chinese occupation of Tibet was the first massive indicator of expansionist policies, yet India inexplicably refused to see it. That exact same year, India's Iron Man, Sardar Patel, wrote a highly perceptive letter directly to Prime Minister Nehru. He outlined his suspicions of China and practically begged for a military appraisal. Sadly, he passed away soon after, and his brilliant warnings went completely unheeded. Fast forward to 1959, and Chow En-lai explicitly rejected India's stand on the borders. Yet, incredibly, even this failed to alert the highest levels of government that force might actually be used.
Which brings us to Part 3, the assumption trap. This is all about hubris in the capital.
When you ignore clear warnings, you usually replace them with assumptions. And this brilliantly illustrates the disconnect. Prime Minister Nehru firmly believed that India's historic relations with China meant a clash of arms was literally impossible. He assumed China was bogged down dealing with internal disorders, food shortages, and revolts in Tibet, making them way too weak to provoke a war. Meanwhile, the reality on the ground was totally different. China was actively hostile, quietly building a massive road right through Aksai Chin and heavily stocking troops. Professional military leaders, guys like Generals Thamaya and Torat, they tried to sound the alarm, but their expert advice was just casually brushed aside.
So instead of preparing defensively, the political leadership enacted what became notoriously known as the forward policy. This meant establishing a whole string of isolated border posts right up against the frontier. But here is the fatal flaw, the real killer. They did this without the tactical or administrative military bases required to actually support them. It's like building a roof without the walls to hold it up. These posts were utterly isolated and left entirely at the mercy of the advancing Chinese forces.
Now, what's really mind-blowing about this slide is the sheer bureaucratic dysfunction it highlights. When reports of Chinese intrusions finally reached Delhi, the government just wanted to look strong. Against all professional military advice, the 17th Infantry Brigade was ordered to evict the Chinese at Thagla Ridge. Guys, this was essentially an act of war. Yet when the army chief understandably asked for this massive order in writing, it wasn't signed by the prime minister. It wasn't signed by the cabinet. It was signed by a lowly undersecretary in the Ministry of Defense. The task they were given was tactically and administratively impossible, and it resulted in the complete wipeout of the brigade. It basically handed China the exact excuse it needed to launch full-scale operations.
That directly leads us into Part 4, broken systems, the total collapse of command.
You have to wonder, how does a government make such catastrophic decisions? Well, it comes down to paralysis at the very top. The Defense Committee was supposed to assess threats and formulate policy, but it was rendered entirely ineffective by this irreconcilable clash between the Defense Minister, Mr. Menon, and the Finance Minister, Mr. Desai. Because the Prime Minister avoided intervening in this deadlock, the armed forces were literally starved of urgently needed funds and foreign exchange for vital equipment. On top of that, the cabinet had absolutely no clear national policy. Despite facing two hostile neighbors, the military was only authorized to prepare to defend against a quote-unquote second-class power.
And the intelligence systems? They were equally broken. Let's look at the 3 steps. Step 1. Information. The fact that the Chinese built a major paved road across the Oxai Chin wasn't even discovered by intelligence agencies. It was just stumbled upon by military patrols 3 whole years after construction began. Step 2. Analysis. Intelligence completely failed to detect the massive logistical buildup required to supply those Chinese divisions, a massive undertaking that takes at least 3 stocking seasons. And finally, Step 3. Action. When frontline troops actually reported these massive enemy concentrations, New Delhi initially didn't even believe them. The chain snapped at every single link.
Finally, we hit Part 5, the preparedness deficit, an army completely left behind.
We've looked at the broken systems, the ignored warnings, and the sheer arrogance of leadership. But to ground the strategic failure in the human reality of the soldiers who were sent to fight, look at this quote. It's perfectly captured by Time magazine in 1962. The Indian Army needs almost everything except courage. Despite all the high-level political posturing, the soldiers sent into those freezing mountains to fight were left fundamentally unequipped by their own government.
So here's the crucial number you need to remember: 7. Due to a declared national policy that emphasized nonviolence and development over defense, along with a really deep opposition to increasing the military budget, the entire Indian Army had an approximate strength of only 7 divisions at the time of the conflict. Just 7 divisions to protect a massive, incredibly hostile border.
Let's forensically break down this massive gap. The equipment given to those 7 divisions? It was literally of World War II vintage. Furthermore, the Army's force structure, arms, and equipment were entirely organized for fighting down in the plains, whereas the Chinese forces were specifically organized and heavily equipped for mountain warfare. And get this, perhaps most shockingly of all, Headquarters IV Corps, the very command structure that was supposed to control the operations in the Northeast Frontier Agency, was actually raised after the battle had already commenced. No way, right? But it's true. The Army was sent into an utterly unwinnable situation.
So, what does this all mean for us? The ultimate takeaway is stark. Strategy fails when objectives exceed capability. The 1962 war is a textbook explainer on why nations fail, not because of the brave troops on the ground, but because of political leaders who substituted wishful thinking for hard intelligence, who actively ignored professional advice, and who demanded military outcomes without providing the necessary military capabilities. It's a sobering reminder that academic knowledge is utterly useless unless backed by the moral courage to face reality. So, looking at the complex defense structures of modern powers today, we have to ask, are governments right now making the exact same invisible mistakes behind closed doors?